In the business world, arrogance is the most expensive emotion you can afford. When a monopoly gets too comfortable, it starts treating its partners like peasants. And in 1991, the biggest entertainment monopoly on Earth made a fatal mistake. They stood on a stage in front of the entire world and publicly humiliated one of their closest corporate allies. They thought they were showing dominance. They thought they were teaching a supplier a lesson. Instead, they accidentally created their own worst enemy. Out of pure, unadulterated spite, that humiliated company decided to build a product solely to destroy them. That product went on to generate over $100 billion in revenue, completely dethroning the king and permanently altering the global entertainment landscape. This is the story of how Nintendo's massive ego gave birth to the Sony PlayStation. To understand the sheer audacity of this corporate betrayal, we have to go back to the late 1980s. Nintendo was not just a successful company, they were an absolute, untouchable monopoly. They controlled over 90% of the home video game market in the United States. But the technology was changing. Games were getting bigger, and the standard plastic cartridges Nintendo used simply couldn't hold enough data. The future of data storage was the CD-ROM. But Nintendo didn't manufacture CD technology. They needed a partner. Enter Sony. At the time, Sony was an electronics titan, famous for the Walkman and high-end televisions, but they had absolutely zero presence in the video game industry. To Nintendo, Sony was just a parts supplier. Nothing more. A brilliant, ambitious engineer at Sony named Ken Kutaragi saw an opening. He convinced Nintendo to sign a joint contract. Sony would build a revolutionary new CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo. It was going to be called the PlayStation, with a space. For Sony, this was the ultimate Trojan Horse. It was their golden ticket into the highly lucrative, multi-billion-dollar video game industry, riding on the coattails of the undisputed king. The contract was signed. Millions of dollars were poured into research and development. Sony even started manufacturing the prototypes. But behind closed doors, at Nintendo headquarters in Kyoto, a massive corporate panic was quietly unfolding. Nintendo's ruthless president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, finally read the fine print of the contract Ken Kutaragi had drafted. And what he saw terrified him. The contract stated that Sony would retain full international licensing rights to every single CD-ROM game created for the new system. Nintendo, a company famous for its iron-fisted control over its software and licensing fees, had accidentally handed the keys to their kingdom over to Sony. Yamauchi was furious. He realized Sony wasn't just building them a piece of hardware, they were positioning themselves to take over the software revenue. He had to kill the deal. But Yamauchi didn't just cancel the contract quietly in a boardroom. He decided to execute one of the most brutal public assassinations in corporate history. May 1991. The Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago. It was the biggest tech event of the year. Sony executives proudly took the stage and officially announced their groundbreaking partnership with Nintendo, unveiling the PlayStation prototype to the world. It was a massive triumph for Sony. But the very next morning, at 9 a.m., Nintendo took that exact same stage. The media was expecting them to confirm the Sony alliance. Instead, Nintendo dropped a nuclear bomb. They announced that they were indeed building a CD-ROM system, but not with Sony. They announced a new exclusive partnership with Philips, Sony's biggest European rival. Sony executives sitting in the audience were completely blindsided. They found out their multi-million-dollar contract was dead at the exact same time the public did. It was a calculated, deliberate, and entirely public humiliation. Nintendo didn't just break a contract, they embarrassed Sony on the global stage. In the rigid, honor-bound world of Japanese corporate culture, this level of public betrayal was unforgivable. Sony's president, Norio Oga, was incandescent with rage. Ken Kutaragi, the engineer who orchestrated the deal, stood in front of his furious bosses. The entire executive board wanted to scrap the project, cut their losses, and walk away from the video game industry forever. But Kutaragi looked at President Aga and pleaded. He said, "Are we just going to roll over and let them do this to us?" Oga, fueled entirely by the desire to avenge the company's honor, looked at Kutaragi and gave a simple, legendary order. Do it. Sony was no longer building an add-on for Nintendo. They were going to build their own standalone console. They were going to war. Sony took everything they had learned from the failed Nintendo partnership and weaponized it. They knew Nintendo treated third-party game developers terribly, charging them exorbitant licensing fees and forcing them to buy expensive cartridges. So, Sony did the exact opposite. They courted developers with cheap CD manufacturing, massive creative freedom, and low royalties. Game studios flocked to Sony in droves. Then came the launch in 1994. Now, in one word, the Sony PlayStation hit the market. It was sleek, it played 3D graphics that blew Nintendo out of the water, and it was targeted not at children, but at teenagers and young adults. While Nintendo stubbornly clung to expensive plastic cartridges for their next console, the N64, Sony flooded the market with cheap, massive CD games like Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid. The financial results were an absolute bloodbath. The original PlayStation went on to sell over 102 million units worldwide. Nintendo's N64? It sold just 32 million. In a single hardware generation, Nintendo's absolute monopoly was shattered into pieces. They lost their undisputed crown, and they have never reclaimed that 90% market dominance ever again. When Nintendo's president read the fine print of that contract in 1991, he thought he was protecting his company from a threat. He thought he was putting a mere parts supplier back in their place. Instead, his arrogance ignited a multi-billion-dollar corporate revenge mission. Sony's PlayStation division is now the crown jewel of their entire corporate empire, generating tens of billions of dollars annually. And it only exists because Nintendo couldn't resist twisting the knife. It proves that the fastest way to lose your throne is to insult the people helping you build it. It's the exact same fatal mistake that Enzo Ferrari made when he insulted a tractor mechanic named Ferruccio Lamborghini. If you want to see how that massive ego clash birthed the world's most aggressive supercar, click the video on your screen right now. I'll see you there.